So on this channel, I mostly make original vintage sewing patterns and modern reproduction vintage style sewing patterns. And that's just because I struggle to find modern, independent sewing patterns that I really like and that are my style. But every now and again, a pattern comes along which is just so perfectly vintagey that I have to make it. And that's what happened with this dress, which is the Anna dress by Style Sew Me Patterns.
As this was a PDF pattern, I started by having the large A0 files printed at a local sewing shop. While this makes the pattern more expensive, I feel it's worth it for me because it saves so much time and energy. The fabric I'm using is this rust orange linen blend that I found very cheap from Pound Fabrics. This pattern only has 7 pattern pieces, so it was really quick to cut out, perfect for the energetically challenged like me. As this fabric is very loosely woven, I start by overlocking around the edges of every pattern piece. I didn't have enough orange thread to change the overlocker to match, so I just used white. I didn't overlock any edges that were going to be enclosed with facings, so the neck and armholes, but I did overlock the hem. To overlock the curved underarm seams, as this dress has a grown-on sleeve, I made little snips into the seam allowance so that I could pull the curved edge straight as I sewed. This should help that seam to lie flat once sewn, but means I shouldn't get any fraying from where I've snipped it. With all the overlocking done, I used a chalk pencil to transfer all the notches, or as I know them, balance marks. They will help me to line everything up neatly later. I then started neatening the loose overlocker threads by threading them through a darning needle and then weaving them into the loops of the overlocking. This is the most secure way I have found of neatening overlocker threads. You can of course just cut them and hope for the best, but if a garment is going to get washed a lot, I tend to take the time to do this as it will make the stitching last longer. Then it was time to wind a bobbin and start sewing. This dress was so simple to put together, I didn't actually have a lot of footage of the actual sewing. It's 2 straight seams for the centre fronts and centre backs, which is what I'm doing now. These seams are then pressed open. The side seams required more prep as both the pockets and the sash had to be secured in the seam. I stitched the 2 sash pieces wrong sides together and then clipped the curved ends so that it would line neatly once turned right side out. Once the tubes were turned, I carefully pressed the sash so that the seams lay exactly on the edge. This was fiddly and probably the trickiest part of this make. I ran 2 rows of gathering stitches along the open ends of the sash and then, matching the notches, began gathering the sash down to fit into its place in the side seam. I carefully pinned the sash into place, making sure the gathers were evenly distributed and lying neatly. I then machined the sash onto the fronts within the seam allowance for the side seam. This was supposed to be basting, but I used a regular stitch length to add more strength to the seam, as the sash would get a lot of tugging and pulling over its lifetime. I could then move on to the pockets. Matching the balance marks, I stitched the pocket pieces to their corresponding back and front pieces. I could then join the side seams. I took extra care when sewing over all the extra fabric of the sash. For the pockets, I matched the two halves of the pocket up and sewed precisely up to the marking. Then, leaving the needle down, I lifted up the presser foot and pivoted the dress around so that I could sew the curved seam of the pocket pieces together. Then, once I got back to the side seam, I did the same thing again, sewing until the marking, leaving the needle down but lifting the presser foot, and pivoting the dress so I could carry on sewing the side seam. With most of the dress made up, I began work on the facings. I used expensive woven fusible interfacing for this because it washes so much better than the cheap papery kind. I also did this trick to get a neat edge where before fusing the two layers together, you join them right sides together along the edge you need to finish neatly. You can then notch any curves and turn the facings right side out, carefully pressing along the seam with your fingers to get a crisp edge. I spent a long time carefully finger pressing all the points and curves of the neck facing and making sure the interfacing was rolled ever so slightly to the wrong side of the facing so the white edge wouldn't show. Then, with that neat seam creased into place, you can fuse the interfacing to the fabric, encasing the raw edge and fusing it to the fabric in one go. Here I am using my hands as a clapper to hold the interfacing in position as it cools, but don't be like me, use an actual clapper or a book or something. Then I could join the facing pieces together. After pressing those seams open, I could sew the facings to the neck and sleeve openings. I made sure to sew carefully over the seam allowances at the shoulder so they laid flat. Having carefully pivoted at the centre front V, I also reversed to reinforce the point as I was going to have to clip a lot of fabric out of the seam to get it to lie flat. I also notched around the curve of the back neck. Then I began carefully pressing all the facings into position. First of all, I pressed the seams open before carefully rolling the facings around to the inside so they were hidden. I could have added some understitching at this point, but I didn't. Instead, I tacked the facings down at the seam allowances with a few hand stitches. I then began work on the hem. I folded under the overlocked raw edge about 1/2 centimetre and pressed it into place. I then folded up the hem another 2.5 centimetres and pinned it into position before slip stitching it in place by hand. Then the dress was finished. I really love how it turned out. I love the handkerchief hem, and I mean pockets, what's not to love? I'm really pleased with my choice of fabric. The linen blend gives it such a lovely drape, and I had a lot of fun swishing and swooshing around in it. I am always nervous of really baggy clothes because they can look so shapeless when sitting, but this dress is blousy without looking like a sack. This dress feels modern and fresh. It's super easy to make and really comfy to wear. I know it'll become a wardrobe staple of mine because it's just so effortlessly chic. The only downside I found is the handkerchief hem. Because it's shortest at the centre front, it can be a bit too revealing for my taste when you sit down, which isn't ideal for wheelchair use. But I found I could fuss about with the longer sections at the sides to make it sit in such a way that I'm less likely to accidentally flash strangers. To say this dress feels so modern, add a hat and some gloves and all of a sudden, it's a 1920s dress. Perhaps that's why this style feels so chic, it's a timeless classic. So there we have it, from elegant swooshing for the 2020s to awkward flapping for the 1920s. I hope you enjoyed this vintage take on a modern pattern. I'm off to practice my Charleston. Thanks for watching. See you next time.